Hello, brothers and sisters. Thanks for joining me again. Yesterday, I covered a quick piece, what comes out of that, but I am all for tightening up the process and changing it because I do think that the way it's set up right now, the potential for fraud and abuse is fairly high. So I'm all for it. And so go watch my video if you're interested in that. And I'm not sure Trump really actually has the power to do this. This might be just him, talking talking pish. I don't know. We will see, but I do applaud the effort. But that made me think, a lot of people do believe that mail-in voting is safe and secure, and they always say that there's no evidence of mail-in voting fraud, or there's very little evidence of it that it would really impact an election, and I would disagree a little. I would say there is evidence, but they are right. It's not been proven in court. There's been enough that would overturn an election. But I just wanted to show you this story. This is a story I read a couple of years ago. This kind of story is really why people like me have some skepticism around mail-in voting and when people say it's secure. So let's read this. So this is from the Heartland Institute, and I'll link this page down, in the notes. And full disclosure, I believe the Heartland Institute is a right or libertarian kind of leaning think tank. I think it's based in Illinois, so I want to get that right out there. But then it's also, they worked with Rasmussen Reports to do a poll. And Rasmussen is, I think, a respected polling organization in most cases. Now, I also have to put a little disclaimer out there that I'm very skeptical about polls. Whenever it comes to Trump, most of the major polls seem to have got it wrong. In the last three elections, they've been completely wrong about the numbers that Trump was likely to get. So I think that there's a problem with polls in general. But that said, let's look at this. So Heartland / Rasmussen poll: 1 in 5 mail-in voters admit to committing at least one kind of fraud during the 2020 election. So 20% of mail-in voters in a poll admitted to committing fraud. So if this is true, I think this bears out my skepticism about polls. And this is exactly why I feel we need to do something to tighten up the process to bring confidence back to the system. So let's keep reading this. So this was December 13th, 23. So around a year and a half ago. And then there's a link here, see and hear media reaction to their poll. I'm not going to click that. You guys can click it yourself. I'm sure the mainstream media are all like, this is a fake poll and don't listen to this. I'm sure it's all that. So some of the highlights, looks like they've got some bullet points here for us. 17% of mail-in voters admit that in 2020 they voted in a state where they are no longer a permanent resident. Okay, now you might say that, but if they only voted once, it's okay. But is it? It's actually illegal, I believe, to submit a mail-in ballot from a state you're not a permanent resident in. And we do vote state by state, so it does actually matter. Okay. 21% of mail-in voters admitted they filled out a ballot for a friend or family member. Okay. Also, I think illegal. Now, again, to put a bright spin on it, my dad is elderly, and maybe it would be appropriate for me to help him fill it out. But you got to make sure it's his choices are the ones you pick. I think I could go along with that, but technically, I think this is still illegal to to fill out a ballot for someone else. Technically, 17% of mail-in voters said they signed a ballot for a friend or family member with or without his permission. So signed a ballot, that's definitely illegal. Even my elderly father can sign his signature or put his X on it. Now, I know, to be fair on that, I know some polling places are really strict about checking signatures. So fair enough, but I think the person should sign their own ballot with or without their permission. That seems problematic. See, the only way I give people leeway is if they're doing it just to help someone out who's incapable. But as long as the vote is the way that person wanted to vote, I'd actually be fine with that. But again, I believe that's illegal. 8% of likely voters say they were offered pay or reward for voting in 2020. 8%. I don't know if paying someone to vote. I think that it might be kind of sleazy, but the more I think about it, in some states that might actually be legal. I look back to, politicians of years gone past saying, "Hey, I'll give you a chicken if you vote," things like that. So I don't know if that's actually illegal, but I think it's unsavory to pay people for their votes directly. But to be fair, we are paying for their votes anyway because we say, "Hey, we'll give you all this free stuff if you vote for me." Whatever this free stuff is, and that works. That gets votes, and that's actually legal. But direct payment seems a little sleazy. I think Elon said he was going to do a raffle, or he was going to pay somebody for their vote. And I thought that was a little bit sleazy when he did that. I think the court decided because it was a raffle, it wasn't illegal. I don't know the details on it, but it's something like that. But so maybe it's not illegal, but I do think it is sleazy. But politicians are sleazy. There's just no doubt on both sides. Or actually, there's more than two sides, on all sides, I guess. But in America, only two sides really matter. Taken together, the results of these surveys questions appear to show the voter fraud was widespread in 2020 election, especially amongst those who cast mail-in ballots. So here we got, this looks like a tweet, or no, actually a Truth Social post that Rasmussen made or could be a tweet where they linked or they copied something by Trump. So Trump came out and said, and this was December 23, the most important poll released in the last 20 years came out yesterday, stating 20% of the mail-in ballots of the 2020 presidential election were rigged or defective. That means that the election was a giant scam. You cannot have a fair and honest election as long as there are mail-in ballots. Cheating will always be prevalent. France and many countries have stopped the madness. The Republican Party must do something now. So, of course, as soon as that, anyone who doesn't like Trump's immediately going to say this whole thing is bogus because Trump is with it. But from the other perspective, this is probably a big fact point for Trump that says, see, I was robbed. And so again, I'm not saying here for sure that all of the mail-ins are bad, but they do create the perception of dishonesty and unfairness. And so I'm a big proponent of getting rid of mail-in ballots. Like they said in France, I think if I remember right, France completely banned them. I think a lot of countries completely ban them, but many countries do allow them for expatriates. And I kind of lean towards that. Let's get rid of them for people in the U.S. Let's make people go and vote in person. I'm all for that. That removes a lot of this ambiguity. But I don't want to disenfranchise people that have no choice but to be out of the country. So the military, government service workers, they have no choice but to be deployed. Private citizens, I don't care as much about. If they choose to take jobs overseas or if they choose to live overseas, that's their choice. And I'm actually okay kind of disenfranchising them. But if we could do it safely for them, I think I'd be okay with that, to have expatriates and of all sorts, including the military and government services, being able to mail in, but none for people in the U.S. And I get that's going to cause hardships in the U.S. I think the biggest one that comes to mind quickly is elderly. If you're elderly and you're in a nursing home, it may be difficult for you to get to a polling place. But I just say on that, then precincts need to do a better job trying to outreach to them. And I don't know. I'm not a precinct worker. I'm not a expert on polling, but maybe it's possible to send poll workers early during the early voting period around to a couple of places and actually let them being the elderly fill out ballots and even help them fill them out. I'm actually okay with that. My dad has a hard time loading the machine here in Texas. He's good once he gets on the machine, but he can't, he has a hard time loading it and putting in his number and things like that. So the poll workers always give me a waiver that I sign a waiver where I'm allowed to help him do it. So that's okay. And all I do is load it for him. And if he's having trouble reading them, I'll read them out to him and say, which one do you want, Dad? And if he's having trouble pushing them, I'll push the button for him. But he's there watching it. And then at the end, the way the works in Texas, it actually prints out a ballot, and then he can look at that ballot, and then we go and he goes and he puts it over in the counting machines. That's how it kind of works. But it's what he voted for. So I think reasonable accommodations are fine for people that need help, but there's just too many potential for fraud and abuse, I believe, in mail-in. All right, so this is the same thing here. And then so here's the actual story. And this is out of Arlington Heights, Illinois. December 23. I don't know who wrote this story. It may have been written by this Heartland org or a news organization. I don't know. A new poll by the Heartland Institute and Rasmussen reports found 1 in 5 voters who cast mail-in ballots during the 2020 presidential election admit to participating in at least one kind of voter fraud. When asked during the 2020 election, did you fill out a ballot in part, in full, or on behalf of a friend, 21% of respondents said they voted by mail and answered yes. So filling out a ballot for someone else is illegal in all states, although many states allow people to assist others with voting. And like I said, in-person assistance is what I do with my dad. We don't mail in. We actually go in. Additionally, 17% of mail-in voters said they voted in a state where they are no longer a permanent resident. 17% also admitted signing a ballot or ballot envelope on behalf of a friend or family member. Both voting in a state where you are no longer a permanent resident and forging a signature on a ballot or even a ballot envelope are fraudulent activities that invalidate votes when caught by election officials. And how are you going to catch them? Most of these are not going to be caught. Come on. According to election data, more than 43% of the 2020 ballots were cast by mail, the highest percentage in history. Yeah, I honestly believe there were votes dumped. That's why we saw somewhere on the order of 8 million more votes in the 2020 election than we saw in the previous or in the 2024 election. So in the 2024 election, I'd say, where did they go? 8 million is too big a number. That this is just, for me, this is just people that decided, I'm not going to vote because I don't like the candidates or whatever, or it's too hard now that mail-ins have been tightened up a little bit. No, I think there were a lot of fraudulent votes cast in that election. And so, yes, I actually agree with Trump. I believe Trump really won if you could take out the fraudulent ballots. Further, 10% of all respondents, not just those who said they voted by mail, claimed they know a friend, family member, coworkers, or other acquaintance who has admitted that he or she cast a mail-in ballot in 2020 in a state other than their permanent residence. 8% said a friend or family member or organization such as a political party offered them pay or reward for agreeing. Taken together, the results of these survey questions appear to show that voter fraud was widespread in 2020 election among those who cast mail-in ballots. The poll of 1,085 likely voters was conducted in November 30th through December 6th. Among those surveyed were 33% Republicans, 36% Democrats, 31% were other, 32% were 18 to 39, 46 were 40 to 64, and 22% were 65 or older. The following statements from policy experts at Heartland Institute, a free market think tank, may be used for attribution. If you'd like to interview them, okay, so that's just saying, yeah, you can use these statements. One guy, the results of this survey are nothing short of stunning. For the past 3 years, Americans have been repeatedly told that the 2020 election was the most secure in history. But if this poll's findings are reflective of reality, the exact opposite is true. This conclusion isn't based on conspiracy theories or suspect evidence, but rather on responses made directly by the voters. A democratic republic cannot survive if election laws allow voters to commit fraud easily. And that's exactly what occurred in 2020. Although some progress has been made in more than a dozen states since the conclusion of the 2020 election, much more work is needed in most regions in the United States. If American elections do not improve soon, voters and politicians will continue to question the truthfulness and fairness of future elections. And this is exactly where I am. I want the process tightened up because I don't trust mail-in voting 100%. And this story just, reinforces my bias on that. I know, I get it. Here's someone else, Justin Haskins. The 2020 election was unlike any other in history, as tens of millions of Americans voted by mail due to the COVID-19 pandemic. At the time, many experts warned that massive mail-in voting could result in widespread voter fraud. Unfortunately, these concerns were prophetic, as the results of this poll clearly show that a large number of voters did indeed fraudulently cast ballots. The past few presidential elections have been razor thin, and signs point to 2024 being a closely contested election. It is paramount that the American people have the utmost confidence that all elections are free, fair, and bereft of voter fraud as much as possible. Therefore, states should ensure their voter rolls are up to date and accurate, encourage in-person voting, and implement common sense measures to reduce the potential of mail-in voting fraud. Yeah, there will always be fraud in all human endeavors. As long as there's people, somebody will find a way to cheat the system. The thing is, can we keep the fraud at a low enough level that people still have a high confidence in the process? That's kind of what I'm looking for here. The results of this poll should be eye-opening to anyone that claims to care about the legitimacy of our democratic institutions. Since the 2020 elections, anyone who questioned the security and widespread mail-in balloting was dismissed as a conspiracy theorist. Now those people are 100% vindicated in their concerns. The only question that remains is whether those stunning admissions by voters will result in reforms. See, I'm not sure there'll be reforms because people do like to cheat. And so they may, choose to not tighten things up. It's kind of like gerrymandering. We're seeing that in Texas. It's a big story in Texas and California right now. I think gerrymandering is awful. It's kind of immoral. It should be illegal. I think we should only be able to redistrict political districts at census time every 10 years. But the law says this is allowable. And it's because both parties want to do it when they're in power instead of them doing the right thing. It's just big news right now because Texas is doing it. And so it's hitting the news cycle. You don't really see it as much outside of the state when the opposing team does it, the Democrats, because the media generally covers right-leaning stories negatively. But it's a fact. They all do it. Now, you do see it in state. So like when Illinois or California do their own gerrymandering, you definitely do see it. Though it's harder in California now because they do have an independent voting council or committee or whatever that draws up the map. Though they're trying to change the law and get rid of that independent council because of what's going on in Texas. It's a crazy time we live in. This survey emphatically suggests that 2020 presidential elections were contaminated by widespread voter fraud, despite the mainstream media's constant attempts to gaslight the American public into believing the opposite. Of the 30% of Americans claiming they voted by mail in this survey, at least 1 in every 5 engaged in one or more kinds of fraud. While many might perhaps rightfully attempt to use these polls in an effort to vindicate Trump's claims of voter fraud and subsequently relitigate the 2020 election, it's more important to look forward than backward. With the 24 elections right around the corner, it's imperative state officials do everything in their power to shore up the integrity of the process. Eliminating or vastly restricting mail-in voting would be a good place to start. Yeah, I completely agree with that. There's no going back. And when I first saw this a year and a half ago, I wasn't out there going, hey, we need to redo the election. No, the election's done. Democrats won. Biden won because they cheated better than the Republicans. But let's look forward. Let's tighten up the process to reduce fraud and abuse in the future. That's all I'm looking for. And I think, that mail-ins is a good start. These survey results show the importance of implementing forward-looking fixes to election rules and procedures that currently allow election fraud. Regardless of what one's views are on the outcome of the 2020 election, Americans deserve an election system that is undeniably transparent and immune from mischief. These survey results conclusively illustrate that election fraud is a rampant and pervasive problem that undermines our democracy. Anyone who believes that the 2020 election was the most secure in American history trusted a corrupt deep state more than their eyes and common sense. Yet this narrative continues to dominate corporate media coverage. Our election systems are broken in this country. If we do not fix them, including harsh punishments for those who break the law, as many admitted to in this survey, it will be impossible to trust any election moving forward. If you don't protect the integrity of election process and every single ballot, the franchise means nothing voting, and we no longer live in a society governed by actual people. And then it looks like below is the actual survey. I'm going to leave that. You guys can read it if you want. I'm not going to read it, but it's there. It'll be linked in the comments. So yeah, so I completely agree. And I know I'm sure the comments will light up with this is MAGA nonsense and these are all lies and all this. And so all I'm saying here is, guys, just look at the facts of this poll. Believe it or don't believe it. That's fine. If you don't believe it, okay, fair enough. But I think there's enough here that I don't think anyone should disagree that, hey, tightening up the process would be good. So let's work with our government officials to tighten up the rules and the procedures around voting. And then people like me will not be as skeptical of the results. And then for me personally, yes, I think mail-in voting is an exploit. I would stop all mail-in voting inside the U.S. or U.S. territories and force people to come and vote in person. That would tighten that up. But I probably would leave it for expatriates because I think that would reduce the fraud significantly. So I think that would be an okay compromise instead of just fully getting rid of it. And then that also helps because it doesn't disenfranchise the 175,000 or so military voters out there, because I don't really want to disenfranchise anyone, but I'm weighing that against having fair and high confidence level elections. All right, let me know what you think in the comments. Like, subscribe if you like it. If you don't like it, don't watch me. And hey, if I got something really wrong here, I do read the comments. I will. I'll do a follow up. And people have been talking to my comments lately, which is good. I do like it. I do like a little back and forth, as long as it's an actual kind of argument. If you just say I'm an idiot or something like that, or I'm stupid, then probably I won't probably respond. But that's just how it is. All right, thanks guys. We'll do it again soon. Bye.